How do you know that the happiness you trust has shattered? Ethan wakes up one morning feeling the calm of what seemed like a perfect marriage. But in one single overheard sentence, everything he thought he knew about love falls apart. How will he confront this betrayal? Tune in to discover this shocking twist. Have you ever wondered, could the person you love be betraying you under your very roof? Ethan never doubted the love in his marriage until one day he overheard a conversation that would completely alter the course of his life. And when the truth is revealed, how will he react? A story of heartbreak, betrayal, and awakening awaits. When trust turns into pain, what will you do? Ethan thought he was living a happy, unshakable life until one evening when he overheard a conversation between his wife and her sister. Words that he could never forget, changing everything he knew. Join us to find out how his life takes an unexpected turn. I overheard her say she'd never be with me again, so I walked away. Ethan wakes up one morning feeling the calm of what seemed like a perfect marriage. But in one single overheard sentence, everything he thought he knew about love falls apart. How will he confront this betrayal? Tune in to discover this shocking twist. Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. The alarm buzzed at 6:30 a.m., jolting me out of my sleep. The smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen was a comforting routine, one I had grown to love in our 6 years of marriage. Sophie was already up, bustling around the house as she always did. Her energy in the mornings amazed me. I took a moment to stretch before joining her in the kitchen. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Sophie said with a bright smile, handing me a steaming mug of coffee. Her hazel eyes sparkled, just as they had the first time I met her. It was moments like these that made me believe we were invincible as a couple. We talked about our plans for the day over breakfast. Sophie had a full schedule at the marketing firm where she worked while I had a meeting with a client in the afternoon. It was ordinary routine and comforting, or so I thought. Later that evening, Sophie's sister Chloe arrived for the weekend. Chloe was Sophie's opposite in many ways. Quieter, more reserved, but the two were close. They spent hours catching up whenever Chloe visited. I didn't mind. It gave me time to work on my woodworking projects in the garage. That night, as I passed through the living room to grab a drink from the kitchen, I noticed Sophie and Chloe laughing over a glass of wine. Their laughter stopped abruptly when they noticed me. Sophie's face flushed slightly, but she quickly recovered, saying something about how they were just girl talking. "Don't let me interrupt," I said with a smile, grabbing my drink and heading back to my project. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, there was something guarded in the way Sophie had looked at me. The next day, I began to notice other small things. Sophie had been spending more time on her phone lately, her screen tilted away from me whenever I walked by. She'd been coming home later from work, always with a plausible excuse. A big campaign, a late meeting, traffic. I chalked it up to the demands of her job and didn't push. After all, trust was the cornerstone of our marriage, or so I thought. Chloe's visit only added to the undercurrent of tension. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something about their whispered conversations and stolen glances made me uneasy. When I asked Sophie about it, she waved me off, saying, "You know how sisters are, just catching up on family drama." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being left out of something important. That Saturday night, after Sophie and Chloe went out for drinks, I waited up for them to return. It was nearly midnight when I heard their laughter as they stumbled through the front door. I pretended to be asleep, listening to their muffled voices in the living room. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, I heard Chloe say something about settling, and Sophie replied with a laugh that sounded hollow. "If I could go back," Sophie said, her voice lower now, "I don't know if I would have said yes." The words were vague, cryptic, and unsettling. I told myself I was reading too much into it, that it was just the alcohol talking, but deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. By the time Sunday morning rolled around, Chloe had left, and Sophie seemed back to her usual self. She kissed me goodbye on her way out for a work meeting, leaving me alone in the quiet of our home. I stared at the empty coffee cup she left behind, a strange heaviness settling over me. For the first time, I wondered if everything we had built together was as solid as it seemed. It was late, the kind of still, quiet night when the ticking of the clock felt unusually loud. Sophie had gone to bed hours ago, or so I thought. I was sitting in my study, trying to focus on work, but my mind kept wandering. That nagging feeling from the weekend hadn't left me. Something was off, and no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the sense of unease clung to me like a shadow. I decided to step out into the kitchen for a glass of water. As I walked past the living room, I heard voices. Sophie and Chloe? No, Chloe had left days ago. My pulse quickened as I edged closer, stopping just short of the doorway. Sophie was on the phone. Her voice, low and sharp, carried through the dimly lit space. I know, she said, her tone exasperated. It's not like I planned for this to happen. A pause. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear the voice on the other end, but it was muffled. Sophie sighed heavily. It's just, I feel stuck. Ethan is a good man, but he's not exciting. I don't know how I ended up here. Her words were laced with bitterness. If I had the chance to do it all over again, I wouldn't. I wouldn't date him. I wouldn't marry him. None of it. The blood drained from my face. I gripped the door frame, my mind racing to make sense of what I just heard. She wouldn't date me again. She regretted our marriage. How long had she felt this way? The person on the other end, her sister, Chloe, I guessed, said something inaudible. Sophie let out a bitter laugh. It's not just that. I feel like I settled, and now here I am pretending everything's fine when it's not settled. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. Was that what I was to her? A compromise? A safe choice, she regretted. The conversation continued, each word twisting the knife deeper. Have you told him? Chloe's voice became slightly clearer. No, Sophie replied quickly. What's the point? It's not like I'm going to leave him. I mean, it's comfortable, safe. And besides, she hesitated, then said, there's someone else. Those 3 words shattered whatever illusion I had left about our marriage. Someone else. I leaned heavily against the wall, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My mind screamed at me to burst into the room, to confront her, and to demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed rooted to the spot, listening. It's nothing serious, Sophie continued, as if trying to convince herself. Just someone at work. He makes me feel alive again. Alive again. I couldn't listen anymore. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I stepped back into the shadows, careful not to make a sound. Somehow I made it back to the study and shut the door softly behind me. Sitting in the darkness, I stared blankly at my desk. My hands were shaking. I replayed her words in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. She didn't love me. She regretted marrying me, and she was seeing someone else. A part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand an explanation, to beg for answers. But another part of me, the part that had grown weary of being ignored, of feeling like something was missing, told me it didn't matter. Her words had said it all. I sat there for hours, paralyzed by a mix of anger, sorrow, and betrayal. By the time the first rays of dawn filtered through the blinds, my mind was made up. There was nothing left to salvage. I couldn't stay with someone who didn't love me, someone who saw me as a mistake. Sophie might have settled for me, but I wouldn't settle for a life built on lies. Without a word, I started packing my things. The house was silent as I moved through it, the early morning light casting long shadows across the walls. Sophie was still asleep, her soft breathing audible from the bedroom as I carefully opened the closet to gather my things. My hands trembled as I pulled a duffel bag off the shelf. Each movement felt heavy, as though my limbs were weighed down by the enormity of what I was doing. I packed only the essentials, clothes, my laptop, a few sentimental items like the watch my late father had given me, and the leather-bound journal where I occasionally jotted down my thoughts. I didn't want to make a scene or draw attention. I just wanted to be gone before she woke up. The hardest part was leaving behind the little pieces of our shared life. The framed photos on the dresser of us smiling at the Grand Canyon, the quirky coffee mugs we'd collected over the years, even the blanket we'd snuggled under during countless movie nights. All of it felt like it belonged to another world, one I no longer had a place in. As I zipped up the bag, my eyes fell on the small wooden box on my nightstand. Inside was the handwritten letter I'd given Sophie on our first wedding anniversary. It was a heartfelt declaration of my love and commitment to her. Without thinking, I opened the box, took out the letter, and placed it on top of my things. I didn't know why, but it felt like taking it back was a small way of reclaiming something I'd lost. Before leaving, I hesitated at the kitchen table. I felt like I owed her an explanation, but words failed me. Everything I might have written seemed inadequate in the face of what I'd overheard. Finally, I scribbled a simple note on a piece of paper from the drawer. I heard you. I hope you find the happiness you're looking for. Ethan. I placed it on the counter where she would see it and stood there for a moment staring at it. A part of me hoped she'd wake up, run out, and beg me to stay. But deep down, I knew she wouldn't. I turned and walked out the door, the cold morning air hitting me like a slap as I stepped into the driveway. My car was parked at the curb, and as I loaded my bag into the trunk, I took one last look at the house. The curtains in our bedroom were drawn, the faintest hint of movement behind them. Was she staring? Had she heard me leave? It didn't matter. I couldn't let myself dwell on it. The drive away from the house felt surreal, like I was floating outside my body. Familiar streets blurred past me as I headed toward nowhere in particular. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a roadside diner. My stomach was too knotted to eat, but I needed a place to sit and think. The waitress brought me a cup of coffee, and I stared into the dark liquid. My reflection distorted in its surface. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for the life I thought we had, anger at her betrayal, and oddly enough, a flicker of relief. I was free now, free from pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. By mid-afternoon, I found myself at a modest motel on the edge of town. The room was small and smelled faintly of bleach, but it was clean and, more importantly, quiet. I dropped my bag on the floor, sank onto the bed, and let the exhaustion overtake me. For the first time in hours, I allowed myself to cry. It wasn't the kind of dramatic sobbing you see in movies, just silent tears running down my face as I lay staring at the ceiling. I cried for the love I thought we had, for the future we'd planned, and for the man I'd been before I overheard those words. As the sun set outside the thin motel curtains, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. Sophie might have seen me as safe and unexciting, but I knew I was more than that. It was time to prove it to her, to myself, and to anyone else who doubted me. Tomorrow, I'd start over. The morning sunlight crept through the cheap curtains of the motel room, painting the walls with a muted gold. I hadn't slept much, and my body ached from tossing and turning all night. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, replaying the words I'd overheard and the life I had just walked away from. It felt surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's story. But this was my reality now, and I had no choice but to face it. I forced myself to get up, take a shower, and dress. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back at me. My eyes were bloodshot, and the faint lines around them looked deeper than they had the day before. I rubbed my face and took a deep breath. This wasn't the end. It was just a new beginning, no matter how painful it felt. After checking out of the motel, I found a small diner nearby. The smell of fresh coffee and bacon was comforting, though I still didn't have much of an appetite. I sat at a corner booth, sipping my coffee and scrolling through my phone. It struck me how quickly life could change. Just yesterday, I'd been in my home, thinking about dinner plans with my wife. Now I was a man starting over, with nothing but a duffel bag and a fractured heart. I called Jake, my best friend since college. If there was anyone who could help me navigate this mess, it was him. "Mike, what's up, man? You sound off," Jake said when he answered. "I left Sophie," I said bluntly. The words hung heavy in the air, as if saying them aloud made them more real. There was a pause on the other end. "What? Why? What happened?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. She doesn't love me anymore. She's been seeing someone else." "Jesus," Jake muttered. "I'm so sorry, man. Are you okay?" "I don't know," I admitted, but I couldn't stay after what I heard. I couldn't keep pretending. Jake's voice was steady, reassuring. "Look, you did the right thing. You deserve better than that. Come stay with me for a while if you need to." I thanked him, but I knew I needed to figure this out on my own. Staying with Jake would feel too much like running from the problem. I needed to confront it head on, to start rebuilding my life brick by brick. I spent the next few days driving around looking for a place to stay. It wasn't easy. Most of the apartments I found were either too expensive or too far from work. Eventually, I found a modest one-bedroom unit on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Signing the lease felt like a small victory, a step toward reclaiming control over my life. Moving in was another matter entirely. I didn't have much to bring with me, just the clothes I'd packed and a few personal items. The apartment felt empty, almost sterile, but it was mine. I decided to focus on filling it with things that reflected who I was, not the life I'd shared with Sophie. In the evenings, when the loneliness became too much to bear, I found solace in woodworking. I'd always loved creating things with my hands, and now it became a lifeline. I spent hours in the tiny garage of my apartment building, sanding, carving, and shaping pieces of wood into furniture. The rhythmic motion was soothing, giving me a sense of purpose. Therapy was another lifeline. I hesitated at first, unsure if I really needed it, but Jake pushed me to give it a try. My therapist, Dr. Harris, was calm and patient, guiding me through the tangled web of emotions I was dealing with. He helped me see that my self-worth wasn't tied to Sophie's opinion of me, that her actions were a reflection of her own issues, not my failings. The hardest part was resisting the urge to contact her. There were moments when I wanted to call, to ask why, to demand answers, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. I focused on work, poured my energy into my hobbies, and started reconnecting with old friends. It wasn't easy. There were still days when the weight of everything threatened to crush me, but I kept moving forward one step at a time. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. This was my life now, and I was determined to make the most of it. A few weeks had passed since I left Sophie, and the pain, though still present, had dulled to a manageable ache. I had settled into my small apartment, decorated it with some of my woodworking projects, and was starting to regain a sense of normalcy. Work kept me busy, and therapy helped me process my emotions. Yet, there was still a lingering question that I couldn't shake. How deep did Sophie's betrayal run? The answer came unexpectedly on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I had just returned from the grocery store when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Chloe. I hadn't spoken to her since the night I left, and seeing her name stirred a mix of emotions. Chloe, hey Ethan, can we meet? I think there's something you should know. I stared at the message, my chest tightening. After a moment's hesitation, I replied, me sure, when and where? We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown. I arrived early, sipping my coffee and staring out the window as I tried to anticipate what she might say. When Chloe walked in, she looked nervous, her eyes darting around until she spotted me. She offered a small, tentative smile as she slid into the seat across from me. Thanks for meeting me, she said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. What's this about, Chloe? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She took a deep breath. I've been feeling guilty ever since you left. I need to tell you the truth about what's been going on. My stomach dropped. Go on. Chloe hesitated, then began speaking in a rush, as though she was afraid she might lose her nerve. Sophie's been seeing someone from work. His name is Adam. Started a few months ago. At first it was just flirting, but then it turned into more. I clenched my jaw, my hands tightening around my coffee cup. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Why did you let me walk around clueless for so long? I didn't know how to, Chloe admitted, her voice trembling. Sophie is my sister, but what she did was wrong. When I realized how serious it was, I tried to convince her to stop. But she wouldn't listen, she said. She said Adam made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Did she ever love me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Chloe's eyes softened. She did, Ethan. I know she did. But somewhere along the way, she lost sight of what she had. She started taking you for granted. That's no excuse for what she did, but it's the truth. I nodded, my throat tight. Thank you for telling me. There's more, Chloe said, looking away. Sophie doesn't know I'm here. She's been trying to reach you. She wants to talk, to explain herself. I shook my head. There's nothing she can say that will change what she did. I've moved on, or at least I'm trying to. Chloe reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. You're a good man, Ethan. You didn't deserve any of this. I hope you find someone who sees that. I left the coffee shop feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. Chloe's confession confirmed what I had suspected, but it also gave me a strange sense of closure. Sophie's actions were her choice, not a reflection of my worth. She had been searching for something she felt was missing, But in doing so, she had destroyed the life we had built together. That night, as I sat in my apartment, I opened the journal I had taken from the house. I flipped through the pages, reading old entries where I had poured out my love for Sophie, my dreams for our future. For the first time, those memories didn't feel like daggers in my chest. They were simply a part of my story, a chapter that had ended. I closed the journal and placed it back on the shelf. It was time to write the next chapter. The crisp autumn air had a bite to it as I walked down the tree-lined street, golden leaves crunching under my boots. It had been 3 months since I left Sophie, and though the pain of her betrayal still lingered, I was starting to feel a sense of peace. My life was no longer defined by what had happened, but by what I was building for myself. I had thrown myself into my woodworking, turning my tiny apartment's garage into a makeshift workshop. Orders for custom furniture were coming in steadily, mostly from word-of-mouth recommendations. The rhythm of crafting something from raw wood, seeing it transform under my hands, had become more than just a hobby. It was therapy, but it wasn't just work keeping me grounded. I had started reconnecting with old friends, meeting for coffee or beers, and letting their warmth remind me of who I was outside of my marriage. I'd even gone on a few dates, nothing serious, but enough to remind me that there were people out there who saw value in me. It was strange, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. One particular day, while browsing a local bookstore, I met someone who stood out. Her name was Rachel. She had auburn hair that fell in loose waves around her shoulders and a smile that seemed to light up the room. I noticed her standing in the aisle, flipping through a book on photography. "You know, that one's really good," I said, nodding toward the book in her hands. "The author does an amazing job explaining light and shadow." She looked up, surprised, and then smiled. "You're a photographer?" "Not really," I admitted, "but I dabble. Mostly landscapes. Woodworking's more my thing." "Woodworking?" Her eyes lit up. "That's so cool. I've always admired people who can create something with their hands." Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and before I knew it, we were sitting in the bookstore's cafe, laughing over cups of coffee. Rachel had a way of making me feel at ease, like I didn't have to pretend to be anything other than who I was. She shared stories about her work as a freelance graphic designer, and I found myself telling her about my journey, the good, the bad, and everything in between. As the afternoon turned into evening, Rachel glanced at her watch and sighed. "I hate to cut this short, but I have a deadline to meet." "This was really nice." "It was," I agreed, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. "Maybe we could do it again sometime?" She smiled, scribbled her number on a napkin, and handed it to me. "Call me." As I watched her walk away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: hope, excitement, and a cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, there was life after heartbreak. That night, as I sat in my apartment, I reflected on how far I had come. The man who had left Sophie in the middle of the night felt like a ghost, a shadow of the person I was now. I wasn't naive enough to think I was fully healed. There were still scars, still moments when the weight of what had happened threatened to drag me down. But those moments were fewer and farther between. I had learned to value myself in ways I never had before. Sophie's betrayal had forced me to confront the parts of myself I had neglected, the dreams I had put on hold, and the strength I hadn't realized I possessed. It wasn't the path I would have chosen, but it was mine, and I was determined to walk it with purpose. A few days later, I found myself back at the bookstore with Rachel. We spent hours talking and laughing, and for the first time in months, I felt a genuine connection. It was too soon to tell where it would lead, but for now, that was enough. Months turned into a year, and though life wasn't perfect, it was good. Sophie reached out a couple of times, leaving voicemails I never returned. I didn't hate her anymore. I simply didn't need her in my life. In this deeply emotional and moving story, we come to realize that life is full of unexpected twists and turns, often taking us down paths we never imagined. It's easy to believe that once we find something good, something lasting, we will hold on to it forever. However, as we see in the case of Ethan, a man who seemed to have everything, a loving wife, a stable career, a comfortable home, the reality of life is far from predictable. Sometimes the very things we believe are unshakable can crumble with a single, unexpected revelation. Ethan had been living what he thought was a picture-perfect life with Sophie, his wife of several years. They had shared countless moments of joy, built a life together that seemed to be filled with love and companionship. In Ethan's eyes, everything was as it should be. He thought he understood the essence of happiness, what it meant to be loved and to love in return. But as it often happens in life, things aren't always as they seem on the surface. Sometimes the truth is hidden behind a mask that only cracks when the circumstances are right. One fateful morning, Ethan's life was turned upside down by a single conversation that he overheard between Sophie and her sister, Chloe. Those words, so casually spoken, revealed a truth that Ethan had never suspected. Sophie, his wife, no longer loved him the way she once did. She was unhappy, regretful of her choices, and most painfully of all, there was someone else. The shock and devastation of that realization were so overwhelming that Ethan could barely comprehend what he had just heard. It was as if the foundation of his entire world had just been ripped away, leaving him adrift in a sea of confusion and heartbreak. However, while the betrayal itself was excruciating, the real turning point of Ethan's journey was not simply the pain of discovery. The true lesson here lies in how Ethan chose to respond to the betrayal. We all go through moments of intense pain and heartache in our lives. Whether it is a breakup, a loss, or some form of unexpected hardship, we all face those dark times where everything seems to fall apart. But it's in those moments of deep anguish that we often find the greatest strength we never knew we had. Ethan's story is not just about betrayal, it is about the strength to rise from the ashes, to rebuild and rediscover who we truly are, and to find the courage to start over, no matter how difficult it may seem. Ethan could have easily drowned in his sorrow. He could have clung to the hope that things might somehow get better if he stayed, if he tried harder. But deep down, he knew that nothing could heal the wounds Sophie had caused. Her words, the words she had carelessly spoken to Chloe, revealed a side of Sophie that Ethan had never truly known. It wasn't just the affair that hurt him. It was the realization that she had settled for him, had made him feel like he was just a choice she had made out of convenience, not love. That was perhaps the most painful aspect of it all. The feeling that, to her, he was never the person she truly desired. So Ethan made the brave decision to walk away. He packed his bags, leaving behind the life they had built together, even though every part of him wanted to fight for it. But sometimes, walking away is the only way to truly find yourself again. The pain was unbearable, and the grief seemed endless. But in that moment of departure, Ethan began to reclaim his life. He chose to stop being a victim of circumstance and to start being the hero of his own story. It wasn't easy, and there were many days when the loneliness and the sadness felt overwhelming. But Ethan understood that healing required him to let go of the past and embrace the future, whatever it might hold. As he navigated this difficult period, Ethan discovered something remarkable. He realized that he had been so focused on Sophie, so dedicated to their life together, that he had neglected his own passions, his own desires, and his own happiness. Through therapy and time spent doing what he loved, like woodworking, Ethan began to rediscover the man he once was, the man he had forgotten in the midst of his marriage. He learned to build a life that was not defined by his relationship with Sophie, but by his own dreams and goals. And slowly, as time passed, Ethan started to heal. The pain of the betrayal never fully disappeared, but it began to fade into the background as he embraced the opportunity for personal growth. And then, as if fate had a hand in all of this, Ethan met Rachel. She was a woman who made him feel alive again, in a way that he hadn't felt in years. She didn't erase the scars of his past, but she reminded him that love was still possible, that there was still hope for the future. Ethan's relationship with Rachel was not an immediate fix for all that he had lost, but it marked the beginning of something new. He was no longer the man defined by his past mistakes and betrayals. He was a man who had learned to pick up the pieces of his broken heart and rebuild something beautiful from the ruins. As we follow Ethan's journey, we realize that his story is not just about heartbreak and betrayal. It's a story of self-discovery and personal strength. It's about finding the courage to walk away from a situation that no longer serves you and embracing the unknown with hope and resilience. Ethan's journey is a testament to the power of self-respect and the importance of not allowing ourselves to be defined by the actions of others. We can all relate to Ethan's story in some way, as we all go through our own struggles and moments of pain. But the key takeaway here is that no matter how many challenges we face, no matter how many times we fall, we always have the power to rise again, to start over, and to rebuild our lives. Ethan's story reminds us that the road to happiness is not always smooth, but it's always worth traveling. The ability to forgive, to let go, and to move forward is a skill we all must learn if we want to live our lives to the fullest. If you found this story moving and want to hear more inspirational tales like this, please make sure to hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. Our upcoming videos will bring you more heartfelt stories, each filled with valuable life lessons that will inspire and uplift you. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you can stay updated on all our new content. We are here to support you on your journey of transformation, self-improvement, and personal growth. Join us and let's navigate the complexities of life together.